What's going on today, Internet? Selfish here with Retrospect. It's been about a month now, and so today we are going to take another look at the Ayaneo Pocket Micro. This is a handheld I've been carrying around for the better part of the last month, and so I've got a lot of things I can say about it, and it maybe help you out with your decisions going forward, and maybe find out if this is the right device for you. Let's take a look. There is a lot to love about the Ayaneo Pocket Micro. On paper, it appears to be the perfect GBA, with 4 times the resolution of the native GBA, obviously sporting a glass front with an all-aluminum shell. The fit and finish are nicer than even the most modified GBA I've ever owned, whether horizontal or in the SP format. MediaTek's Helio G99 SoC is much stronger, and it opens up a lot more ability than the original GBA as well. There are multiple versions of this handheld, so for comparison, the version here I'm using is the Pocket Micro with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. I'm not going to go over the I/O or the specs again in this particular video because I already did it in my initial unboxing video, my first look video. If you're curious about the other hardware and specs for this handheld, there will be a link down in my thingamabob. This handheld is really actually pretty satisfying. You can emulate multiple systems with it. It's not just the Game Boy Advance, obviously, though that is what this is geared toward. And again, it does have a 4 times resolution screen, and it is rocking a 2:3 aspect ratio, so it is the right aspect ratio for the GBA, along with a couple other systems that are out there. It's really fun to hold even without the addition of ergonomic bumps on the back. It really doesn't need them. For some reason, like the weight and the finish of it, because of these curved edges, really makes a big difference when you're trying to hold on to the handheld. It doesn't get uncomfortable at all, which is really weird because I thought this being a little brick itself would be uncomfortable, and with it being heavy it would be uncomfortable, but it's not at all. And because it does have this all glass front end and this metal shell, it does do a really good job of dissipating heat throughout the entire handheld instead of being just heat spots in one specific area. And now the back here is plastic, but it works in conjunction with everything else in the finish. I've recently found myself playing the game version of Twilight Princess, even though I had just purchased this for the Nintendo Switch. Something about the ability to just keep this in my pocket makes it a big deal. And so instead of playing it on my Switch, I'm just going to play it on here, apparently. The other cool thing about doing it on here through the Dolphin emulator is I'm actually playing it at 2 times the resolution of the original GameCube. And yes, it doesn't exactly screen match on here, but even the little bit that you can just stretch it, I know people are going to be mad about this, but you really can't tell, and it really just looks good with the ability to do that upscaling. So I don't have a complaint about it, and if somebody else does, they can not have to do that with their own. That's fine, but I'm going to do it with mine because I like how it looks. And I did try converting my Switch copy that I had just purchased to be able to play on here using Sudachi, and there is still some issues with some frame freezing and some tearing issues, so I went back and started playing the GameCube version just to see if it was any different. By the time I upscaled it, they look pretty much the same. And once you get your controller set up in Dolphin, life is pretty good. Now, as you can see, the D-pad works pretty well on fighting games. Here on Street Fighter Alpha, does a really good job, so no qualms about this D-pad on here. I was a little concerned with how slippery it seemed like it might be, but it actually's got a pretty good pivot to it, and it works pretty well. Now, this is the Switch version of Contra, but as you can see with the D-pad here, we will get a little bit of jumpiness, but that's exactly what you want. You don't want it to be perfect, because you still want to be able to hit diagonals, which you can do just fine on here. And why the Switch version is so tiny when I have it set to force stretched, I don't know, but this is what we get. But yes, D-pad definitely passes the Contra test. I have seen people discussing how loud that the buttons are, the face buttons on here. I don't think they're real loud, and they don't have a ton of travel. Where you do hear them, though, is on the up, on the rebound, as they bottom out coming up. It's actually the top of the button hitting the bottom of the surround right here. And you can listen to them. I don't think they're very loud, and my wife hasn't said anything yet, so I don't think they're too bad, but I know that is one complaint people have had about them. Now, these Hall Effect joysticks that are on here do have a little bit of height to them. Not a lot, but a little bit. They have a pretty decent amount of travel for how small they are. They do click, so you do have all that going for you. And again, they do have a decent amount of travel for being a device that's supposed to be pocketable. Usually you'd see these inlaid a little bit more, but these are not. These are actually sticking out, which does give them that a little bit of extra travel and the ability to use a slightly thicker stick when doing that. Some of the things you might have noticed when I did my first look video is that the start and select, and then also the Ayaneo and whatever this other button is, are down here. So they're kind of on 2 sides of the device, but they were able to keep them off of the front of the fascia here, allowing it to be a lot cleaner looking, which does look nice. There's also 2 additional buttons here on the right side that are kind of more of a rubbery finish. I think they're actually plastic, but just really keeps them in line and flush. and then as well as your TF card slot on the left side here, which your card is underneath a little door here, and we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. And I really am a fan of how they put the Remake logo on here. Again, they inlaid it, so there is actually a divot in the plastic to keep it running flush, and I could probably pull this sticker off, which I haven't done yet, but it looks like it's just going to wear itself off anyways. That gives you an idea how much I have used this handheld here after the last 30 or more days here. The shoulders and triggers work really well. They are a little flush, and they can be a little difficult to get to depending on what you're playing. Cruising USA, for instance, you do have to reach over in order to hit the gas and brake pedals. But thank you to the Helio G99 that's in here, you actually don't have the same problem you have with almost every other handheld that allows for N64 to play Cruis'n USA. This will play at full speed, which is pretty awesome, because with all the handhelds I have, there's very few that will play at full speed, especially one of this size. Usually it's the bigger, like the Odins and things like that, that you can play N64 and get Cruis'n USA to play at full speed. This is a very hard game to emulate. And actually, because I played it at the wrong speed so much, I have a really hard time playing at full speed now. But it is pretty great. I've gotten further in it on this handheld than I have on any other before, just because it's in my pocket. And you know, they say the best handheld is the one that's with you, and because it will play, again, at the speeds that you'd like to see it at. And then lastly, before I go through the rest of the review, I just want to talk about there is a fingerprint scanner on the top that will help you unlock the handheld if it is locked. And that is what that is there for. Also, if you're going to make any online purchases or do any banking, you can also use that fingerprint scanner for that as well, similar to what you'd use on a cell phone. So pretty neat to have that up there. It's a nice little touch. You do see it on devices like the AYN Odin and things like that, but it is not a common feature to have. It does put a little nice cherry on the top for this premium build handheld that we have going on right here. If you want to play Game Boy Advance, this handheld absolutely nails it. And like you saw, I can get some availability in things like Nintendo Switch. You can play most of Sega systems on here just fine, including Sega Saturn. This G99 has just enough power to be able to push most of your retro emulators to that top point. You're not going to get great PS2 emulation on here, but this is made for GBA, so it's not going to look the best on here with the letterboxing anyways, but you do get some PS2 access. It's just going to be a more limited library, as well as some of the other high-end systems that you might be trying to push through here. But for the most part, you are going to get to play most of what you want to play in most of the handheld systems you want. Now, when it comes to Android systems, I rarely load like NES or Super NES on them, just to keep room on my memory card, and because I typically do have another handheld with me that will be Linux-based, and they tend to play really well on there. So instead of taking up space, those aren't things that I usually emulate on here, but the little bit that I did before I deleted them, they emulated on here just fine. You do sometimes get these really weird load screens when you're trying to play PS2, and as you can see, it really is missing part of the screen over here for some reason, but usually when we get in the game, it works just fine. So I am here using the latest build of Nether SX2 to be able to play PS2 on here. It's not a perfect frame rate, but it usually hovers right around 55, which is good enough for this game. You will see some dips from time to time, and that is just a problem with the processor not being fast enough. Again, this is a Helio G99. This is not exactly MediaTek's strongest processor that's out there, but this tends to be the one that's advertised for gaming for whatever reason. I think I said enough about it in my first review. Definitely not my favorite processor for gaming, but it does the trick in a handheld like this, where you're not really looking to do a crazy amount of heavy gaming on it. Now, one of the things you will see with something like PlayStation 2, because of this particular chipset that's in here, it does not play at full speed, which I did touch on a little bit in my initial review, but this is really, it gets really slow. The other thing is, the sticks are super sensitive. It's hard to aim at anything because you're all over the place. And some games, like this particular one, doesn't have a way to turn down stick sensitivity, so you are literally just stuck with overly sensitive sticks that make it really hard in order to lock on to anybody. Now, you might benefit a little bit by raising the sticks up, but then you're also making it less pocketable. Now, focusing device around GBA at 4x resolution, it looks amazing, and it's easier on the resources because it is the screen itself without actually having to use the resources in order to upscale it. It isn't the only 3.2 gaming system that looks like this, but one would gravitate towards the massive GBA library. Game Boy Advance's library is absolutely extensive, and so I see why you'd want to focus on that. Now, as I stated before, I have played some other things on here, like PSP, PS2, N64, Sega Saturn, GameCube, you know, the whole lot of them. Some play better than others. One of the unfortunate things is it takes a lot of work on individual games to get them to work properly on most of the systems in here other than GBA. GBA seems to work without a hitch, but if you want to play something on GameCube, on Nintendo Wii, or if you want to play something on even some of those older systems, it does take work. And the PS2 especially takes a lot of work in order to get a game to play. If you're going to play a first-person shooter, very difficult because the sticks seem sloppy due to there not being much resistance here, and those games aren't allowing you to add resistance to the joysticks like some of the newer consoles are, so you are kind of stuck with what you have. And speaking of joysticks, they are a little tall for something that is supposed to be pocketable, which is why I carry them in that pouch. They could have easily concaved these more, so they would have been more even even, or maybe even gone, and I know this is going to sound sacrilegious, but maybe even gone with a Vita style stick. We've seen some handhelds like the Retro Pocket Flip go with that, and those sticks worked great and still offered L3 and R3. So that would have been an option here. I know a lot of people wouldn't have liked that, but if you are going to stay consistent with retro gaming on here, the sticks really aren't necessary because the GBA didn't have sticks to begin with. Now, I understand that the idea was to make it look like the Nintendo Micro, which I don't see it. This isn't micro at all. I understand like maybe the design prospect of that, but this looks nothing like the Game Boy Micro, and it's far too big to be a micro. Now, and this would be kind of a today's rendition where people are using bigger handhelds, but the micro was such a niche device, and if you're going to give it a love letter, this is a terrible love letter to give it. It just doesn't make any sense. But back to the sticks. So with these sticks on here, as you saw when I opened it up, these sticks just fall right off, and they fall off in your pocket. They fall off in that little satchel that comes with this. That's where I keep this when I travel with it or have it in my pocket, because one or both of these sticks fall off every time that you pull it out of that bag or your pocket. The other problem is there are these dust covers in here that will get lost. I actually lost a stick in the car for multiple hours while I tried to find one of these stick toppers in the car because it came off. And there's no way, unless you wanted to glue them to make them stay better, but then you're losing the accessibility to these sticks. And I looked on Ayaneo's website. I don't see any sticks available as of the making of this. Maybe they will come out with some, but I guarantee you that eventually this will be unplayable for me because I will not have these sticks. This should have been easily found out in product testing. It is the biggest annoyance on this handheld, and it happens every time that you try to use it. In fact, this handheld came with stick toppers to make these sticks wider, and I've lost one of the two that it came with, which is the reason why I'm not using those on here now. That did make the stick wider, which did help with some of your accuracy with aiming, with having a wider thumbstick, but because I lost one and have never found it again, I am now even more concerned about losing the actual sticks themselves and never being able to find them again. So if Ayaneo, if you're listening, make these available and maybe send everybody an extra 10 sets of them that order this handheld, because you guys should have picked that up when you guys were doing product testing. I'm not sure why these were allowed to ship that way. It's enough to make me not want to use this handheld, but it's got like a magic spell on me, and every time I go to grab a handheld, this tends to be the one I gravitate towards, and it's not my most powerful, it's not my nicest per opinion, but this is not the handheld I would typically prefer to use to play a lot of the games that I play, but I love GBA so much, and this works so well with GBA, and even when you're stretching some of the other systems like GameCube, it really doesn't look bad on here. I didn't come across any games yet where I'm like, whoa, no, we can't do that. Like, it really doesn't look bad on here. Now, you are skipping out on any of your higher end systems, especially your PS2 games. There aren't many that'll play on here unless you get some of those really, really lightweight PS2 games or role-playing games, which is unfortunate when you have a handheld that's $200 and you can't play most of the library on here. Also, it's not an OLED screen, so in that $200 category, you almost always see an OLED screen, more powerful processor. Now, I know the front of this glass, well, everybody does that now, so that's not really that unique to this either. Also, that glass becomes a fingerprint magnet. Now, I'm glad that I went with red, and the reason why I did was I was concerned about the glass showing fingerprints. I'm not sure if you can see it as I tilt it, maybe not, but this is covered in fingerprints. And normally I don't like this burgundy color, which looks a lot more red on camera, but it's actually a burgundy. I normally don't like this color at all, but it's grown on me for this handheld. I really do like it on here, and I think it's mostly because I would hate to see all the smudge marks on the black, because I can notice them on here, but oh my god, it would drive me nuts if this was on black. The other thing is, for $30 to $40, you can get a handheld from Powkiddy that does twice the resolution on GBA. Now, it is a stark difference. For one, this screen gets a lot brighter, so that makes a big difference. Also, the screen cover helps bring out some of the saturation colors. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that does make a difference. This is running it at 2 times natively. This one here is running it at 4 times natively, but both still look really good. And if you weren't running this handheld next to this handheld, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, because I've done them separately before, and it plays just as well. I'm just as happy on both of them. And now this thing, as you can see, buttons accidentally hit themselves, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But these are pretty close. So this is a 3.2 native screen as well, and this one here is at twice the resolution versus the 4 times the resolution. So naturally, this is going to be a little bit better, but you do have room here to upscale if you wanted to. So that is an option for you as well. But both look really good. This is obviously going to be warmer and a little bit brighter than this one here would be. But for $30 to $40, versus $200+ for this one, you could get a pile of these, one for yourself and all your friends, and OTC dongles with Wi-Fi to make these get on the internet, so you guys can net play together. So that kind of kills some of the value statement for this, which I think it was obviously not a value. And like I said, you do spend a lot of time making games look good and operate well, not necessarily on the Game Boy Advance side, but on everything else. And so this becomes a $200 tinker toy. And this is for people who want to tinker, which I love. So for me, maybe that's why I gravitate towards it, because I know there's always something I can fix, and I feel that sense of accomplishment every time I'm able to fix something. But I shouldn't have to be fixing stuff on this handheld every time I want to play a game, unless I want to, which I guess I kind of do, because I've gotten most of my library on here to play, but I don't think that's going to be for everybody. I think most people are going to want to pick this up and go, and that is just not the option here. Also, their front end on here sucks. The AS-based stuff is terrible. Their FPS counter is inaccurate. This thinks I'm getting 60 frames per second right now. Even if you go in here, it will tell me that I'm at 60 frames per second, which is not at all what's going on. It's topping it out, I guess, at 60 frames per second, but it'll pop it up, and you'll see the frame counters in different emulators moving up and down, where this frame counter rarely ever moves. It has to be out of the frame rate for roughly 4 to 5 seconds before this thing even makes a hiccup. Then it seems to pay a little bit more attention for a while, but then once it gets more steady, it stops again. Another thing that I found after my initial review is you can actually hook headphones up to this handheld. You can do a Type-C to 3.5 adapter if you run headphones, but for some reason, the port is actually attached to the controls. So as soon as you hook up headphones to this handheld, you no longer have control over the device. The touchscreen seems to work, but nothing else seems to work. None of these other buttons work on here at all. So you lose all your functionality just by plugging in headphones. That to me seems like a software issue, likely due to the fact that maybe this build for this is for maybe mobile, for a cell phone or something like that, where they wouldn't have had physical buttons to have to worry about. That is the problem with hooking up a set of headphones that's not Bluetooth to this. And normally that wouldn't bother me, but I just wanted to test it out, and now it's bothering me because it doesn't work properly. And that might be okay for something like watching a movie, but who wants to watch a movie on a 3.5-inch screen? There's that. Now we're going to go over the SD card and just talk about what it entitles to get an SD card in here. Now I do cut my fingernails pretty frequently. You can't actually get this thing open. So you do need to use something like a knife. I've been trying to be really nice to it and been using a tweezers to get this open, but one or the other has to be used, and this actually scratches up the paint, not necessarily from the tweezers, but from the moving in and out of the SD card. Now if you take a look at my SD card here, see if I can get it on here. It is pretty messed up. There's chunks of it missing, not just paint, but plastic from using a tweezers to get it in and out. Because like most of them, you do just push down on the SD card to get it to pop up. But it's actually below the rim here, so you can't actually get this thing out. It's getting worn down to the point now where there's hardly a ledge on there, so I can't even get my fingernail underneath it. But if you use your tweezers, sometimes it comes out. I guess that's the easiest to ever come out. A lot of times it doesn't. But look at how beat up this is. And this is a brand new card. It's only about 3 or 4 weeks old, and it's completely destroyed. This also makes me think that somewhere inside is also scratching up the card. I have pulled this out a couple dozen times probably with doing setup and things like that, finding games I wanted to play. The other thing is when you put it back in, you do sometimes run into the same problem. Sometimes you can get it in. It does seem to have a powerful spring, but because it is touching, the card is touching the actual edging, it doesn't come out that way, and now we got to work on getting this thing back in, and you really have to get it in at the right angle in order for it to go, and there it is. This is all getting scratched up right here just along this lip, and that's where the card rubs on the lip itself when you pull it out because they are snug in there. Next, I want to go over how often you hit the wrong buttons just with these random button presses when you're playing games, because you would think like down here, these aren't in your way, but as you move your hands around, these are very, very sensitive buttons all the way around the handheld. Boy, this thing's getting dirty while I'm talking here. Look at that thing. Ugh. If you just so much as sneeze on them, they will actually start select or open the Ayaneo window, which actually is probably the most common one for me. Typically when you have your fingers close to the joysticks, because you can more or less press them from the top or the bottom, because these are on 2 sides of the device. I think it's an ingenious design, other than the fact that they're too sensitive, and because they are on 2 sides, you have twice as much opportunity to accidentally hit them, and it seems like when I'm doing stuff, I accidentally hit them on the top while I'm using the joysticks. The other problem I have is if I clamp down and I'm playing a game where I need to use R2, L2, or even R1, L1, but your hand is sitting here like this on the side, right? Well, this is also a sensitive set of buttons over here. Almost always you will hit this RC button here while you're doing that. It's doing it right now. So as you go and you're trying to play a game like cruising or something like that, where you use this as a gas pedal and your brake, when you go to hit the brake, all of a sudden you'll have menus and things popping up, or it'll drop you out of the game completely back to your desktop or the front end that you're using, because it actually, that's what that button does sometimes, depending on what screen you're on. And the last thing I wanted to hit on here real quick is this fingerprint scanner that never works unless I'm banking, it seems like. It's not going to open up my device. I try too many times, try again later, and then I'll get a swipe to open, and it'll ask me to put in my PIN that's on here. It won't actually unlock the device for me. Very rarely does this actually unlock. I've tried resetting my fingerprint on here multiple times and used different fingers. Has the same problem with all of them. So kind of a useless feature if I still have to type in the code, just for the ability not to have something else that could fail. I maybe would rather just have a power button up here. I don't know why we need this fingerprint scanner. That doesn't work. If it worked all the time, it'd be one thing. But, oh, there we go. See? It only took me, what, a dozen plus times in order to get to work. Also, AS Space opened, which I don't really use because it is really terrible at scraping box art. I have been kind of against Emulation Station. I spent some time on another handheld recently trying to get it set up, but never really got it working the way I wanted. I've got Emulation Station Desktop Edition on here, and it actually is set up pretty much the way that I'd want it to be set up. And I've learned some other options and just to kind of clean things up a bit. And so, as you can see, I don't have a ton of different systems on here because I just have the stuff I wanted to test, but it seems to be working out pretty well with how I have it set up. So now I understand why people like Emulation Station. I don't know that I'll stick with it on other handhelds, but it does work really well on here. Much better than the ASpace whatever that they have, which I believe is one of these buttons on here. So that one there is that. They change every time. This should be the desktop, and this here should be, so that's a back button, I guess, right now. And then this here maybe ASpace? No. See, none of them are opening it now. Start select. So I don't know. It should have opened on its own by now with one of these buttons, but it's not. So whatever. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. I don't really understand why. So in conclusion, there are a few things that I definitely think that should have never passed quality control testing when they did this handheld. And these are things that I look for in any of the devices that I get sent to me before they're released so that I can try to make recommendations on things that need to get fixed, as well as other people making the same recommendations or similar. But I don't know why this was released at this price point. It's very disappointing. Now, there is a thing in electronics where you'll get something that's really expensive when it comes to a piece of electronic kit, and that one thing will do one thing really well and kind of, sort of, but still suck at doing everything else. And that's kind of what I'm feeling about this handle. Does a really good job playing Game Boy Advance, but everything else it kind of does well, but mostly sucks at. That is very common in technology when it comes to higher end systems, which is unfortunate. This is a space that's taken up by a lot of budget retailers that make really good devices for very, very inexpensively. This is outkicking its coverage by far. In a recap, if I were to have done this, I would have done either fixed or removed this fingerprint button. I would have done something differently about this SD card slot over here. If nothing else, just make it so the SD card actually is more centered in here, so it's not rubbing up against the wall, where sometimes you can't actually get it to eject out of the device. I would have taken a look at these buttons over here and maybe inset them slightly more, because they are just slightly, I mean, we're talking fractions of a millimeter sticking up, but it is enough where you can hit them if you are using R2 and L2. You will hit these buttons there. These buttons here, as cool as they are, and as much as it makes the front of this look really nice, having these on two sides of the device makes them way too easy to hit, uncommonly in many different situations. Also, nobody really knows what any of these buttons do. I've watched a couple of reviews since my first one. They all do something different, and it's really dependent on what screen you're in, and it's hard to remember what does what in what screen. So something different with that would have been great as well. If you're not going to have a 3.5 jack in here for headphones, I didn't really understand headphones because I'm a Bluetooth guy, but recently my subscribers keep telling me to use headphones when I play, so I've been trying to do it more and more. That got me to test headphones on here with the adapter, and the adapter works on any other device I've ever plugged it in, but having you lose full control over the device by putting headphones in really eliminates the purpose of not only having headphones, but the device in general. Like I said, you could use it as a movie player, but on a 3.5-inch screen, who's going to want to do that when their cell phone screen is going to be bigger than this in the first place? And the biggest fail on this entire device that I think definitely needs to be addressed is these sticks and them falling off constantly. I don't know if they were shorter, if they would fit better and this wouldn't be a problem, or if it's the materials that they're made out of. And I do believe Ayaneo should send new sticks and dust covers to everybody, multiple pairs probably, because everybody is going to lose these if they take this device out of their house and put it in a pocket or a book bag or anything like that. Now, if you're not going to bring this device out of the house and you are going to treat it like a niche $200 handheld and set it on your coffee table, you might be okay with this, though be aware, I've been playing things like Monkey Ball and had these sticks pop off before. Now, I don't know if that's because they get loose when they're in my pocket and I don't notice, and these will pop right off while you're playing Monkey Ball. They're not on there that tight, but again, that could be because I also do carry the device around with me. So if you are going to keep it at home though, make sure that you keep your area clean and maybe play on a hard floor so that you can find these sticks and they don't get lost in your carpet or go underneath your couch or something like that. So that was a lot of negative things about this handheld, but I did start off with a lot of positives. And I don't want this to be a butt sandwich, but I absolutely love this handheld. It calls to me. I don't know what kind of magical spell it has cast on me, but I am often grabbing this over other handhelds to play. It really feels premium in your hands because it is. It's not just a pretend premium. It's not made out of crappy plastics. It is this beautiful, what seems to be one solid piece of aluminum body. It plays the games that I want, even though some took some tweaking to get there. I'm very proud of myself for being able to get some of those games to work, and that gives me an ability on here. I've had multiple G99 devices before. I've never been impressed by any of them. This one is actually doing very well. This is the best performant one that I've had, and I don't know what makes that difference that's making this outperform some of the other G99s that I've had before, but this is probably the most performative one. Now, there are almost every other handheld in the market today outperforms this. As far as any Android handhelds go that came out this year, this is going to be at the bottom of the pile of the Android handhelds from this year. here. I think people kind of focus a little bit too much on the G99. That is a powerful CPU when it's really not. Again, on here, it works great, and this is a great handheld. I have a hard time recommending it, however, because of all the things that I listed. I would feel bad if somebody lost their stick caps, or if somebody wanted to use regular headphones and couldn't use regular headphones. There's a lot of things on here that easily could have been fixed, but because Ayaneo is very set on getting out new devices constantly, I mean, while I was waiting for this, I think 2 or 3 other ones were announced, so they're so fixated on having all these devices in their lineup to come out that they didn't take care of this device before they put it on the market. And there does seem to be a sufficient waiting period on Ayaneo between when they announce and when they actually ship the retail products. In that amount of time, they would have the opportunity to send their devices out to reviewers, not to review to the public, but to go through and actually do some product testing with the handhelds before the final builds are made and they're released to the public. So can I recommend this to you? No, I can't. I can't recommend this to anybody. Now, if you got money burning a hole in your pocket right now and you really love GBA, I would get this. I would have no problem telling you to get this. You're not going to need these sticks if you lose them anyways, if you're playing GBA, so it's not going to be important. So you might have the same device with no sticks and you're going to be totally fine. I wouldn't expect to keep the sticks on here though, or use headphones. But yeah, if you have money to burn, this is an absolutely phenomenal device. It feels good. My hands don't get tired somehow without the ergonomics on it, just because of the way that this is built, and it's weighted just perfectly to balance in your hands. So yes, absolutely. This is a phenomenal device with a lot of flaws. It's perfectly flawed, some might say. But that's all I got for you today. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, share this video with your friends because sharing helps grow the channel. And if you want to help out with that algorithm, there's going to be a couple of videos here that YouTube chose for you that they say that you're going to like. And YouTube's never wrong with choosing stuff that you're going to like. So I would recommend watching one, both, or even more videos along those lines from this channel. It'd be much appreciated. Also, you might learn a thing or two. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.